You long hack! You don't belong here! Security!
Brad Mitchell's voice exploded across the baggage claim area at Denver International Airport, his finger jabbing toward a black man in casual clothes. I don't care what sob story you're selling, but this is my terminal, and I won't have vagrants wandering around scaring passengers. The words hit the morning air like a slap. Travelers froze mid-stride, their wheeled luggage suddenly silent. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Conversations died. Every eye in the vast baggage claim area turned toward the confrontation unfolding near Carousel 3. David Thompson stood perfectly still, his worn leather messenger bag slung across his shoulder. At 47, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something significant from nothing. His dark skin showed the faint lines around his eyes that came from decades of early mornings and late nights of boardroom battles fought and won. Today, he looked like any other traveler. His navy polo shirt was slightly wrinkled from the 3-hour flight from Seattle, and his khaki pants had that lived-in comfort of someone who valued substance over style. What Brad Mitchell didn't know was that David Thompson was the CEO and majority shareholder of Apex Logistics, the company that held a $75 million contract with Denver International Airport. In exactly 18 minutes, Brad would lose his job, but Brad had no idea who he was really talking to. The baggage claim area stretched out like a cathedral of modern travel with its soaring ceilings and gleaming steel carousels. The morning light streamed through massive windows, casting long golden rectangles across the polished floor. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt electric with tension as Brad Mitchell advanced towards David with the swagger of someone who believed his small slice of authority made him king of the world. Brad was 38 with sandy brown hair that he kept perfectly styled and a uniform that was pressed with military precision. His supervisor badge caught the light as he moved, and his blue eyes burned with the kind of righteous anger that came from too much coffee and too little sleep. Behind him, Carmen Rodriguez, his assistant supervisor, followed with uncertainty written across her face. "I've been doing this job for 8 years. Brad continued, his voice carrying across the terminal, "and I know trouble when I see it. You're not supposed to be in this area." David's response was measured calm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding," Brad shot back, stepping closer, "is you thinking you can fool me. I've seen this act before." Near the information desk, Elena Vasquez, a 26-year-old TSA agent, shifted uncomfortably. She had worked with Brad long enough to recognize the tone in his voice, the edge that appeared whenever someone didn't look like they belonged in his version of the airport. Her dark eyes flicked between the two men, her hand unconsciously moving toward her radio. At Carousel 4, Jake Patterson, a 29-year-old business consultant heading home to Chicago, slowly pulled out his phone. Something about this interaction felt wrong. The aggression in the supervisor's voice, the calm dignity of the man being confronted, the way other airport employees were starting to notice but not intervene. "People like you," Brad said, his voice dropping to a hiss, "always think you can just wander around where you don't belong." The words hung in the air like smoke. David's response was quiet, but it carried. "People like me." Brad's face flushed. "You know exactly what I mean." The moment stretched. Phones began to emerge from pockets and purses. The modern instinct for documentation kicked in as travelers sensed they were witnessing something that would matter beyond this morning, beyond this airport, beyond this moment. David Thompson had faced this choice point many times in his 47 years. The moment where he could reveal who he was, end the confrontation with a business card and a phone call, and walk away with his dignity intact but nothing changed. Or he could let it play out and endure the humiliation and learn exactly who these people were when they thought no one important was watching. Today, with a $75 million contract renewal on the table and the future of thousands of jobs in the balance, he chose to wait. To listen. To let Brad Mitchell show everyone in the terminal exactly who he really was. Carmen Rodriguez felt her stomach tighten. She had worked under Brad for 2 years, had seen him handle difficult situations before, but something about his tone today made her want to step back to distance herself from whatever was about to unfold. The baggage carousel continued its endless rotation suitcases, passing like silent witnesses to a confrontation that would change everything for everyone involved. In 18 minutes, careers would be destroyed. In 18 minutes, lives would be transformed. But right now, in this moment, all anyone could hear was the sound of Brad Mitchell digging his own grave with every word that came out of his mouth. David Thompson had built Apex Logistics from a single delivery truck and a burning desire to prove that respect wasn't something you had to beg for. 22 years ago, he had walked into a warehouse job interview wearing his best thrift store suit, only to be told that people like him weren't management material. The hiring manager suggested he try the loading dock instead. That night, David had made two decisions. First, he would never again let someone else's assumptions define his worth. Second, he would build something so significant that small-minded people would have to choose between their prejudices and their paychecks. Apex Logistics now operated in 37 states, employed over 4,000 people, and held contracts with major airports, shipping companies, and retail giants across the country. David's deliberately casual appearance today wasn't an accident. It was strategy. He conducted these invisible inspections quarterly, walking through the facilities of his major clients dressed like any ordinary traveler or worker. It was the only way to see past the polished presentations and corporate politeness to discover how his company's partners really operated when they thought no one important was watching. The philosophy had served him well in business and in life. You learned more about someone's character in 5 minutes of unguarded interaction than in 5 hours of formal meetings. Brad Mitchell, on the other hand, had spent 8 years climbing the narrow ladder of airport authority with the determination of someone who had never quite achieved what he thought he deserved. He had started as a baggage handler himself, working nights and weekends watching planes take off to destinations he couldn't afford while sorting through the belongings of people who took air travel for granted. The promotion to supervisor had come 3 years ago, and Brad had wielded his new authority like a sword. He prided himself on running the tightest operation in the airport, which translated to zero tolerance for anything or anyone who didn't fit his vision of how things should be. His recent rejection for promotion to terminal operations manager had left him bitter. The position had gone to a younger candidate with a college degree, someone who spoke about inclusive leadership and cultural sensitivity in ways that made Brad's teeth clench. He had been passed over, he believed, because he was willing to enforce standards that others were too weak to maintain. Carmen Rodriguez had watched Brad's personality darken over the past 6 months. The charm that had made him effective with passengers had curdled into something harder. She found herself making excuses to avoid working his shifts, but today she had no choice. As his assistant supervisor, she was required to support his decisions, even when they made her uncomfortable. Carmen had immigrated from Mexico with her family when she was 12, and she understood what it felt like to have someone decide your worth based on appearance alone. But she also understood the value of employment, and Brad held her career advancement in his hands. Elena Vasquez recognized the tension in Brad's voice because she had heard it before. 3 months ago, she had watched him detain a Middle Eastern family for additional screening that turned into 2 hours of humiliation. Last month, it had been a young black mother traveling alone with her children, questioned repeatedly about whether she could afford her first-class tickets. Each time, Elena had filed incident reports that seemed to disappear into administrative black holes. She had begun to wonder if Brad had connections higher up the chain, people who shared his views about who belonged in airport premium areas and who didn't. Jake Patterson had built a successful consulting career by recognizing patterns, and he was seeing one now. The aggressive posture, the public confrontation, the assumption of guilt without evidence. His phone was already recording as he watched the supervisor's behavior escalate beyond anything that could be justified by security concerns. As a white businessman who had traveled extensively, Jake had witnessed discrimination before, but had often convinced himself it wasn't his place to intervene. Today felt different. The calm dignity of the man being confronted, the obvious wrongness of the situation, and the power of social media to demand accountability made action feel not just possible, but necessary. David had learned patience through necessity. In his early career, fighting back against discrimination had often backfired, marking him as difficult or aggressive. He had developed a different approach: let people reveal themselves, fully document everything, and then respond with overwhelming evidence rather than emotional reaction. This morning's inspection had already revealed maintenance issues that needed addressing and staffing patterns that could be improved. But Brad Mitchell's behavior was uncovering something more serious: a culture that allowed personal bias to override professional responsibility. David's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about the board meeting scheduled for later that morning. The Denver contract renewal was worth more than money. It was a test case for Apex Logistics' expansion into Western markets. How the airport handled diversity and inclusion would determine whether David recommended Denver as a model for other airports to follow. Brad's worldview had been shaped by 8 years of watching people he considered undeserving receive privileges he had to earn through hard work. He saw David's presence in the baggage claim area not as neutral territory accessible to any passenger, but as an intrusion into his domain by someone who clearly didn't belong. The leather messenger bag, the casual clothes, the unhurried pace all triggered Brad's assumption radar. In his mind, legitimate passengers moved with purpose, carried expensive luggage, and dressed to announce their status. David's calm confidence in the face of authority read to Brad not as dignity, but as suspicious defiance. What Brad couldn't see was that David's bag contained documents that could transform or terminate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What he couldn't understand was that true power often moved quietly, dressed simply, and never needed to announce itself to maintain its authority. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal not just individual character, but the deeper questions about respect, assumption, and the cost of letting prejudice masquerade as policy. "Look, I don't have time for games," Brad said, stepping closer to David, his voice rising enough to attract attention from travelers at the neighboring carousels. "This is a secure area, and you're clearly not where you're supposed to be. I need to see some identification and a boarding pass that proves you have legitimate business here." David remained motionless, his expression calm but alert. "I understand you're doing your job, but I think you're operating under some incorrect assumptions." "The only assumption I'm making," Brad snapped, "is that people need to follow rules. And the rule is that only authorized personnel and passengers with legitimate business are allowed in this section." Carmen Rodriguez felt her stomach drop as she watched Brad's tone escalate. She had seen him handle suspicious individuals before, but there was something different about his approach this morning. More aggressive, more personal. "Brad," she said quietly, stepping closer, maybe we should handle this properly." Brad interrupted, not taking his eyes off David. 8 years I've been keeping this airport safe, and I'm not about to let someone waltz in here and disrespect that." Elena Vasquez found herself moving closer, ostensibly to organize passenger information pamphlets at a nearby stand, but really to observe the interaction. Something about the way Brad was handling this felt wrong, familiar in a way that made her chest tight with anxiety. Jake Patterson had his phone positioned discreetly, the camera capturing both men's faces as he started recording. His business instincts told him this was about to become significant, and his conscience told him that someone needed to document whatever was unfolding. "You know what I think?" Brad continued, his voice carrying across the terminal space. "I think you're one of those people who heard about some lawsuit or social media controversy and decided to come test us. Well, congratulations. You picked the wrong supervisor on the wrong day." David's eyebrows raised slightly. "Test you. Don't play innocent. We get troublemakers all the time, people trying to create incidents they can film and post online. People who think they can walk into any space they want and claim discrimination when they get called out for not belonging there." The words hit the air like a match to gasoline. Conversations at nearby carousels stopped mid-sentence. A businessman waiting for his luggage looked up from his phone with sharp attention. A family with young children unconsciously moved farther away, sensing tension they didn't understand but wanted to avoid. people like you. Brad said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried further than his shouting. Always think you can game the system. Always looking for someone to blame when you don't get treated like royalty. Jake Patterson felt his jaw clench. The phrase, people like you, repeated for the second time, each instance carrying more venom than the last. His finger pressed record as he watched the confrontation escalate beyond any reasonable interpretation of security protocol. David's response was measured, but there was steel beneath the calm. What exactly do you mean by people like me? Brad's face flushed red. You know exactly what I mean. Don't try to twist this into something it's not. I'm not twisting anything, David replied evenly. I'm asking you to clarify what you mean. Carmen Rodriguez felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. She had worked in customer service long enough to recognize when a situation was spiraling out of control. Brad's personal animosity was overtaking any legitimate security concerns, and she found herself torn between supporting her supervisor and protecting herself from the fallout. Look, she interjected, attempting to de-escalate. Maybe we can just check your information and clear this up quickly. But Brad was past the point of de-escalation. 8 years of accumulated resentment, 6 months of frustration over his failed promotion, and a morning's worth of stress converged into a focus on David that had nothing to do with airport security and everything to do with power. No, Brad said firmly. This individual has been disruptive and evasive. He's refused to follow basic instructions, and now he's trying to make this about race. That's not going to work here. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David had not mentioned race. Brad was the one who had introduced it, and now he was trying to use David's measured questions as evidence of manipulation. Elena Vasquez felt her training kick in. As a TSA agent, she was supposed to support security decisions made by airport supervisors. But she was also supposed to recognize when personal bias was masquerading as security protocol. Brad's behavior was checking every box on her mental list of inappropriate conduct. More phones were coming out now. Word was spreading through the terminal with the speed of modern communication. A woman near Carousel 2 was typing rapidly on her phone live, tweeting the confrontation. A teenager was recording a TikTok video, whispering commentary about the crazy airport drama unfolding in front of him. David Thompson made a decision that would define the next hour of his life. He could end this confrontation immediately with a simple revelation of his identity. Brad would apologize, Carmen would be embarrassed, Elena would file a report that would disappear, and nothing would change for the next person who found themselves in this situation without the protection of wealth and authority. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and quietly handed Brad his driver's license. Brad examined it with the scrutiny of someone looking for counterfeit bills. David Thompson, he read aloud as if the name itself was suspicious. Says, here, you live in Seattle. What are you doing in Denver? Traveling, David responded simply. Traveling for what purpose? Business. What kind of business? David remained silent for a moment, understanding that every question Brad asked was digging the hole deeper, the kind that brings me to airports. Brad's frustration exploded. That's not an answer. I'm trying to maintain security here, and you're playing word games with me. The raised voice attracted the attention of travelers throughout the baggage claim area. A businessman in an expensive suit paused his phone conversation to watch. A group of college students returning from spring break stopped their animated discussion to observe. A family reunion in progress near Carousel 4 fell silent as the grandfather pointed toward the confrontation. Jake Patterson's recording now included clear audio of Brad's escalating demands and David's calm responses. The contrast was striking, one man becoming increasingly agitated and aggressive, the other maintaining dignity in the face of obvious harassment. What none of the witnesses could see was the internal calculation happening in David Thompson's mind. Every question Brad asked, every assumption he made, every word he chose was being cataloged and evaluated. Not for purposes of personal revenge, but for the comprehensive understanding of how this airport's culture allowed discrimination to flourish under the guise of security. The confrontation had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding. It had become a test of character, institutional responsibility, and the question of who was really in charge when authority met actual power. Jake Patterson had seen enough. The business consultant from Chicago made a decision that would amplify this moment far beyond the confines of Denver International Airport. Opening Instagram, he started a live stream with the simple caption, "Y'all need to see this discrimination happening live at DN." Within 30 seconds, viewers began joining the stream. Within 2 minutes, the comments section exploded with reactions. "This is insane," typed Business Maven 47. "Someone needs to stop this," wrote Travel Junkie 22. The viewer count climbed 5,100, 200, 500. "This is Jake Patterson," he whispered into his phone, angling the camera to capture both Brad and David in frame. "I'm at Denver International Airport where a supervisor is harassing a black passenger for absolutely no reason. This man has done nothing wrong, answered every question, and this supervisor is treating him like a criminal." Monica Chen, a 24-year-old travel blogger waiting for her connecting flight to Los Angeles, noticed the commotion and immediately understood its significance. She opened Twitter and began a thread that would eventually reach 500,000 shares. Thread currently witnessing racial profiling at Den Airport. Supervisor Brad Mitchell targeting black passenger for existing in baggage claim. This is exactly how discrimination operates in 2024, disguised as security. Denver Airport discrimination near the Delta baggage area. Rosa Martinez, a 35-year-old janitor, paused her routine cleaning to watch the confrontation. In her 4 years working at the airport, she had seen Brad Mitchell target passengers before. Always people of color. Always with the same justification about security and following protocol. Rosa's hand trembled slightly as she gripped her cleaning cart. She had witnessed this pattern but never spoke up, too afraid of losing her job to challenge a supervisor. But watching David Thompson's calm dignity in the face of obvious harassment, seeing the phone's recording, recognizing that this moment might actually matter, she felt something shift inside her. Tyler Brooks, a 31-year-old airline employee on his break, recognized Brad's voice from across the terminal. Tyler had worked with Brad on several occasions and had always been uncomfortable with his approach to passengers who didn't fit his narrow definition of legitimate travelers. Last year, Tyler had watched Brad detain an elderly Latina woman for 45 minutes, questioning her right to be in first class despite her valid ticket. Tyler had said nothing, then telling himself it wasn't his place to intervene. The shame of that silence gnawed at him now as he watched history repeat itself. "This has gone too far," Tyler muttered to himself, pulling out his own phone to document what was unfolding. Monica's second tweet gained traction immediately. "Supervisor's badge says Brad Mitchell. He's now demanding this passenger prove he belongs in public area of airport. Passenger completely compliant, answering questions calmly. This is what implicit bias looks like." Brad Mitchell Jake's Instagram livestream had reached 1,000 viewers. The comments were flowing so fast they blurred together. "Call airport police. This is disgusting. Someone help that man. Get this supervisor's name. This is going viral." Elena Vasquez felt her professional training warring with her moral compass. As a TSA agent, she was supposed to support airport security decisions, but as a woman who had experienced discrimination herself, she recognized exactly what was happening to David Thompson. She approached Brad cautiously. "Hey, Brad, maybe you should let me handle this." Brad snapped without looking away from David. "This individual is being uncooperative and evasive. I need to see additional identification and proof of legitimate business in this terminal." David reached into his messenger bag and produced a business card, handing it to Brad with the same calm manner he had maintained throughout the confrontation. Brad looked at the card suspiciously. "Apex Logistics, CEO." He laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the baggage area. "Right. And I'm the President of the United States." Monica's Twitter thread continued, "Update passenger just showed business card identifying himself as CEO. Supervisor's response, mockery and disbelief. The audacity, the absolute audacity." Denver Airport discrimination. Rosa Martinez found her voice. She approached the customer service desk where a colleague was pretending not to notice the confrontation. "Maria," she whispered urgently, "someone needs to call management." "This is wrong." Maria Gonzalez, a veteran airport employee, glanced toward the confrontation and sighed. "Rosa, you know how this works. We don't get involved in supervisor decisions." "But this isn't a decision," Rosa insisted, her voice gaining strength. "This is harassment. I've seen him do this before." Jake's live stream now had 2,000 viewers. He provided running commentary. The passenger just provided identification and a business card. The supervisor is treating both like they're fake. "Folks, this man has complied with every request and is being treated like a criminal for standing in a public area of the airport." Tyler Brooks made a decision. He approached Elena Vasquez, his voice low but urgent. "Elena, you and I both know this isn't about security. Brad's targeting this guy because of how he looks." Elena nodded grimly. "I've seen it before. Filed reports that go nowhere." "Then maybe it's time to document it differently," Tyler said, nodding toward the phones recording throughout the terminal. Carmen Rodriguez felt the situation slipping beyond her control. Brad's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and she could see passengers throughout the terminal stopping to watch, many with phones raised. Social media had taught her that viral moments could destroy careers in hours. "Brad," she tried again, "maybe we should get Margaret involved. This seems like it might need management attention." "What it needs," Brad said, his voice rising again, "is for this individual to stop playing games and admit what he's really doing here." Monica's Twitter thread had gained momentum, developing multiple airport employees now witnessing confrontation. Passengers throughout terminal recording. "This supervisor has created a public spectacle targeting one man for his race. Where is management hash? Denver Airport discrimination hash Brad Mitchell." The hashtag #BradMitchell was beginning to trend in Denver. Local news stations monitored social media for breaking stories, and the combination of airport discrimination, viral video, and specific names created exactly the kind of story that demanded immediate attention. Jake's Instagram Live had reached 3,000 viewers, with comments ranging from outrage to legal advice. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Airport needs to fire this supervisor now." "That passenger is handling this with incredible grace. Where is security to stop this harassment?" David Thompson surveyed the scene around him with professional calm. Phones recording from multiple angles. Social media posts amplifying the moment beyond the terminal. Airport employees wrestling with whether to intervene. Passengers choosing sides without understanding the full context. This was exactly what he had hoped to avoid, and exactly what he had expected might happen. Brad Mitchell was revealing himself, completely stripping away any pretense of legitimate security concerns to expose the bias that drove his actions. In approximately 14 minutes, David would answer a phone call that would change everything for everyone involved. But for now, he continued to wait to document and to let Brad Mitchell show the world exactly who he was when he thought no one important was watching. "That's it," Brad declared, his patience finally snapping completely. "I'm calling airport police. This individual is being disruptive, uncooperative, and I suspect he may be trespassing." He reached for his radio with theatrical authority, as if calling in reinforcements would validate everything he had done up to this point. "Security to baggage, claim Carousel 3. I need assistance with a disruptive individual who refuses to comply with basic security protocols." Elena Vasquez felt her stomach drop. She knew exactly who would respond to that call. Officer Luis Hernandez, a 40-year-old airport police officer who had worked with Brad before and generally supported his tough but fair approach to terminal management. But she also knew Luis's supervisor, Sarah Wilson, who took a more aggressive stance toward anyone Brad identified as problematic. Jake Patterson's Instagram livestream exploded with activity as viewers realized the situation was escalating. "Oh no, they're calling police on this man for existing," he whispered to his phone. "This is about to get so much worse. Someone needs to help him." The comment section filled with increasingly urgent responses. "Call the airport, someone contact management, this is insane, get a lawyer." The viewer count had reached 4,500 and climbing. Monica Chen's Twitter thread gained new urgency. Urgent airport supervisor now calling police on black passenger who has violated no laws and answered every question. This is escalating exactly as these situations always do. #Denver Airport Discrimination #. Brad Mitchell David Thompson remained still, his expression unchanged. He had expected this escalation. In his experience, people like Brad Mitchell always doubled down when their authority was questioned, always called for backup when they realized they were losing control of the narrative. Rosa Martinez felt her heart pounding as she watched the confrontation reach a new level. She had seen too many videos of police interactions gone wrong to feel comfortable with where this was heading. Despite her fear of retaliation, she approached Elena Vasquez directly. "Elena," she said, her voice shaking but determined, "this isn't right. You know this isn't right." Elena met her eyes, seeing her own internal conflict reflected in Rosa's face. "I know," she said quietly. "But what can we do?" "We can tell the truth," Rosa replied. "We can speak up." Within 3 minutes, Officer Luis Hernandez arrived, followed closely by Security Supervisor Sarah Wilson. Luis was a seasoned professional who had worked airport security for 12 years, but he was also someone who generally trusted the judgment of terminal supervisors like Brad. Sarah Wilson, on the other hand, was 29 years old and had built her career on being tougher than anyone expected from someone her age. She approached every situation with the assumption that force and authority were more effective than patience and de-escalation. "What's the situation?" Brad Luis asked as he approached, his hand resting casually on his radio. "This individual has been loitering in the baggage area without legitimate business." Brad explained, his voice taking on the official tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "He's refused to provide adequate identification or explanation for his presence, and he's been argumentative and evasive throughout our interaction." Jake Patterson's livestream captured every word, and his viewers responded immediately. "That's a lie." He answered every question. This supervisor is lying to police. The viewer count reached 6,000. Sarah Wilson looked David up and down with the practiced assessment of someone who made quick judgments about people based on appearance. His casual clothes, his calm demeanor, and his presence in a space where she expected to see either passengers with expensive luggage or airport employees in uniform immediately put him in her potential problem category. Sir Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to compliance. "I need to see identification and proof that you have legitimate business in this area of the terminal." David reached into his wallet again, producing his driver's license for the second time. Sarah examined it with exaggerated care, as if the act of scrutiny itself would reveal deception. "This doesn't explain what you're doing here," she said. "The baggage claim area is for passengers claiming luggage or authorized personnel. Are you claiming luggage?" "No," David replied simply. "Are you authorized personnel?" David paused for a moment, considering his answer. "That depends on how you define authorized." Sarah's expression hardened. "It's a simple yes or no question, sir." Monica Chen live tweeted the exchange security supervisor now interrogating passenger with same questions already answered. Moving goalposts. Classic harassment pattern. #Denver Airport Discrimination. Tyler Brooks, watching from the airline employee area, pulled out his phone and called the airport's customer service hotline. When the representative answered, he identified himself as an airport employee and reported a situation of racial profiling in progress at baggage claim. "I think you need to get a manager down here immediately," he said. "This is about to become a major incident." Elena Vasquez made her own decision. She approached Luis Hernandez, whom she had worked with many times and generally respected. "Luis," she said quietly, "I've been watching this whole interaction. This man hasn't done anything wrong. He's answered every question calmly and politely. Brad's escalating this for no reason." Luis looked at her with surprise. Elena wasn't known for challenging supervisor decisions or inserting herself into security situations. "Are you sure about that?" "Elena, Brad says he's been uncooperative." "Luis, I'm telling you what I saw. This isn't about security. This is about something else. Jake Patterson's Instagram livestream had reached 8,000 viewers. National news organizations monitored social media for breaking stories, and several had already assigned reporters to investigate the trending hashtags #BradMitchell and #Denver Airport Discrimination. David Thompson checked his watch. 12 minutes until his first scheduled phone call. He had endured discrimination before, but never with this level of documentation, never with this many witnesses, never with social media amplifying every word and gesture to thousands of people in real time. The next few minutes would determine whether this incident became a teaching moment about accountability and change, or just another viral video that generated outrage without consequences. "I think we need to search his bag," Sarah Wilson declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed escalation was the same thing as security. "If he can't provide adequate explanation for his presence, we need to determine if he poses any threat to airport operations." The words hit the terminal air like a gavel. Conversations at nearby carousels stopped completely. A businessman waiting for his luggage looked up from his Wall Street Journal with sharp attention. A family with young children unconsciously stepped farther away, sensing a level of tension that made them uncomfortable. Jake Patterson's Instagram livestream exploded with viewer activity. "They want to search his bag now," he whispered urgently to his phone. "This man has done absolutely nothing wrong, and they're treating him like a terrorist. This is insane." The viewer count had reached 12,000 people, with comments flowing so fast they were impossible to read individually. David Thompson looked at Sarah Wilson with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the confrontation. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you failed to provide adequate explanation for your presence in a secure area of this airport," Sarah replied, her tone suggesting that questioning her authority was itself evidence of guilt. "This is the baggage claim area," David said evenly. "It's not a secure area. Any passenger who has cleared TSA security can be here." Brad Mitchell, energized by Sarah's support, stepped forward again. "Don't try to lawyer your way out of this. You've been evasive and suspicious from the beginning. A bag search is standard procedure for individuals who can't adequately explain their presence." Carmen Rodriguez felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. In her 2 years working under Brad, she had never seen him push a situation this far. The presence of airport police, the growing crowd of witnesses, and the obvious recording devices throughout the terminal made her increasingly nervous about being associated with whatever was unfolding. Monica Chen's Twitter thread had gained massive traction, with her latest update receiving hundreds of retweets. Within minutes, update security supervisor now demanding to search passenger's bag. No legal basis for this. Man has answered all questions provided ID violated no laws. This is harassment escalating to potential assault. #Denver Airport Discrimination. Rosa Martinez found courage she didn't know she possessed. The 35-year-old janitor approached Elena Vasquez directly, her voice shaking but determined. "Elena, I've seen him do this before," she said quietly. "Brad, I mean. 3 months ago it was that Middle Eastern family. Last month, the young black mother with her kids. Always the same pattern. Always people who look like they don't belong in his version of the airport." Elena felt her professional training warring with her moral compass. As a TSA agent, she was supposed to support security decisions. But as someone who had experienced discrimination herself, she recognized exactly what was happening to David Thompson. Tyler Brooks, watching from the airline employee area, made a decision that would later prove crucial. He pulled out his employee tablet and began documenting everything he could see and hear, creating an official record from his perspective as an airport employee. Luis Hernandez, the airport police officer, felt increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the confrontation. In his 12 years of airport security, he had learned to distinguish between legitimate security concerns and personal conflicts disguised as official business. Brad's behavior was checking every box on his mental list of inappropriate conduct. "Sarah," he said quietly to his supervisor, "I'm not seeing any legal justification for a bag search. This individual has complied with identification requests and hasn't exhibited any threatening behavior. Sarah Wilson's response revealed her inexperience with complex situations. He's being evasive about his purpose here. That's suspicious behavior. Answering questions politely isn't evasive, Louise replied. And being in the baggage claim area isn't a crime. Jake Patterson's live stream captured every word of the exchange between the security officers, and his viewers responded immediately. Thank God someone has common sense. That police officer is the only one acting professionally. Fire the security supervisor. The viewer count had reached 15,000. David Thompson made a strategic decision. He unzipped his leather messenger bag and began removing items slowly and deliberately, placing them on the nearby bench where everyone could see. First, an expensive laptop computer, then a leather portfolio containing business documents, a Mont Blanc pen, a folder marked Confidential, Apex Logistics, several business cards with his name and title clearly visible. Brad Mitchell's face flushed as he saw the items, but his pride prevented him from backing down. Anyone can buy expensive props, he said, his voice carrying across the terminal. I've seen this scam before. The comment drew gasps from nearby passengers. A businessman in an expensive suit who had been watching the confrontation shook his head visibly. An elderly woman traveling with her granddaughter whispered something that sounded like, "This is disgraceful." Monica Chen live tweeted the moment passenger voluntarily showing bag contents, expensive laptop, business documents, professional materials. Supervisor's response claims it's all fake. The level of bias here is staggering. #Denver Airport discrimination. Tyler Brooks felt his anger building as he watched Brad's increasingly desperate attempts to justify his behavior. Tyler had worked in the aviation industry long enough to recognize actual security concerns versus personal vendetta, and this situation had crossed every line of professional conduct. He approached Elena Vasquez again, his voice low but urgent. "Elena, you need to know something. I've been documenting everything on my employee tablet. Timestamps, direct quotes, witness observations. This isn't going to disappear into an administrative black hole." Elena met his eyes, understanding the significance of what he was telling her. Employee documentation carried different weight than passenger complaints. It created an official record that management couldn't ignore. Rosa Martinez took her own leap of courage. She approached the customer service desk where her supervisor Maria Gonzalez was pretending not to notice the confrontation. "Maria," she said, her voice stronger than she felt someone needs to call Margaret Foster. "This is wrong, and it's getting worse." Maria looked toward the confrontation, seeing the crowd of witnesses, the recording devices, and the obvious tension between the security officers. "Rosa, you know how this works. We don't interfere with security decisions." "But this isn't a security decision," Rosa insisted. "This is harassment. I've seen Brad do this before, and someone needs to stop it." Jake Patterson's Instagram livestream had become a community event, with viewers sharing the link across other platforms and sending messages to local news stations. The comment section had evolved from simple outrage to organized action. "I'm calling the airport shared this on Facebook, sending to Channel 7 News. This supervisor needs to be fired." David Thompson surveyed the scene around him with professional calm. His voluntary display of his bag's contents had served multiple purposes. It demonstrated his willingness to comply with even unreasonable requests. It showed the expensive and professional nature of his possessions, and it forced Brad to reveal the extent of his bias by dismissing obvious evidence. Carmen Rodriguez made a decision that would protect her career. She stepped away from Brad's immediate proximity and approached Luis Hernandez. "Officer," she said quietly, "I need you to know that this situation has gone beyond anything I'm comfortable supporting. I think we need management involvement immediately." Luis nodded grimly. He had been thinking the same thing. "I'm going to call for a supervisor," he told her. Sarah Wilson overheard the conversation and bristled. "I am the supervisor." "I'm talking about a management supervisor," Luis clarified. "This situation needs administrative oversight." The tension in the terminal had reached a breaking point. Passengers throughout the baggage claim area had stopped their normal activities to watch the confrontation. Social media posts about the incident were spreading beyond Denver, picking up national attention. Margaret Foster, the airport director, was in a budget meeting when her assistant burst through the door. "Ma'am," the assistant said urgently, "you need to see what's happening in the terminal." Social media is exploding about a discrimination incident at baggage claim. Margaret looked at the tablet her assistant handed her, seeing Jake Patterson's live stream with 18,000 viewers and Monica Chen's Twitter thread with thousands of shares. Her stomach dropped as she recognized Brad Mitchell in the video. "Get me down there immediately," she said, standing up and grabbing her jacket. "And call legal. We're about to have a major incident." Back at Carousel 3, David Thompson checked his watch. 8 minutes until his first scheduled phone call. The confrontation had evolved exactly as he had expected, revealing not just individual bias, but the deeper cultural problems that allowed discrimination to flourish under the guise of security protocol. What none of the participants could anticipate was how completely the next 8 minutes would transform not just their individual careers, but the entire culture of accountability at Denver International Airport. Tyler Brooks' public challenge to Brad Mitchell had opened floodgates that couldn't be closed. Within minutes of his declaration, other airport employees began approaching the group, each carrying their own stories of Brad's problematic behavior that they had previously kept silent. "I need to say something, too," said Jennifer Walsh, a 28-year-old gate agent who had been watching the confrontation from the nearby Delta desk. Her voice shook, but carried clearly across the terminal. 3 weeks ago, I watched Brad detain an elderly black man for 40 minutes because he thought the man's first-class ticket was suspicious. The passenger missed his connection and had to spend the night in Denver because of it. Jake Patterson's live stream captured every word, and his 40,000 viewers exploded with reactions. How many people has this supervisor harassed? This is a pattern of abuse. Where was management? When all this was happening, Monica Chen immediately tweeted Jennifer's testimony, breaking airport employees coming forward with multiple incidents of discriminatory behavior by Supervisor Brad Mitchell. This wasn't an isolated incident. #Denver Airport Discrimination #pattern. Margaret Foster felt her stomach sink as she realized the full scope of what her airport was facing. Individual incidents could be explained away as misunderstandings or training issues. A documented pattern of discriminatory behavior captured on live stream with multiple employee witnesses created legal and public relations consequences that would take years to repair. Rosa Martinez found courage she didn't know she possessed. Last month, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I saw Brad make a Hispanic family wait 2 hours to claim their luggage because he said they looked like they might be carrying something illegal. Their only crime was speaking Spanish while they waited." Elena Vasquez nodded grimly. "I remember that incident. I filed a report about it that went nowhere. When I asked my supervisor about the outcome, I was told that Brad's decisions were supported by his track record of keeping the airport safe." The phrase "track record" sent a chill through Margaret Foster's professional consciousness. If Elena was telling the truth, it meant that management had been aware of problematic behavior and had chosen to protect Brad rather than address it. That level of institutional complicity created exponentially greater legal liability. Carmen Rodriguez, realizing that her silence was becoming complicity, made a decision that would save her career. "I need to be honest," she said, stepping away from Brad completely. "I've seen Brad target passengers based on race and appearance for the entire 2 years I've worked with him. I told myself it was just thorough security work, but I know that's not true." Her admission was perhaps the most damaging of all because she was Brad's direct assistant, and her testimony carried the weight of intimate professional observation. Jake Patterson's viewers were overwhelmed by the avalanche of revelations. This supervisor has been terrorizing passengers for years. Where was oversight? How many people suffered in silence? This airport needs to be investigated by the FBI doctor Michael Chen. A physician who had been waiting for his luggage nearby approached the group with visible emotion. 6 months ago, Brad Mitchell accused me of stealing medical equipment from my own hospital because I was carrying surgical instruments in my bag. He detained me for 3 hours and threatened to have me arrested before finally checking with my hospital to confirm my identity. The testimony was devastating, not just because of its content, but because of Dr. Chen's obvious credibility and professional standing. His story suggested that Brad's discrimination wasn't limited to passengers who might seem vulnerable or unable to defend themselves. Tyler Brooks was documenting everything on his employee tablet, creating an official record that would be impossible for management to dismiss or bury. "How many more stories are there?" he asked the growing group of witnesses. "More than you want to know," said Patricia Reeves, a 34-year-old security guard who had worked at the airport for 6 years. "I've seen Brad abuse his authority dozens of times. The difference is that today someone was recording and other people found the courage to speak up." Margaret Foster understood that she was witnessing the collapse of her airport's reputation in real time, but she also recognized that the employee testimonies offered a pathway toward credibility and reform if she handled them properly. "I need all of you to know," she said loudly enough for the recording devices to capture, "that anyone who speaks the truth about what they've witnessed will be protected from retaliation. And I need you to know that what you're describing represents a complete failure of our oversight and accountability processes." The admission was politically risky, but morally necessary. Margaret had learned from other viral incidents that attempting to defend the indefensible only made eventual consequences worse. Monica Chen live tweeted Margaret's response. "Airport director publicly acknowledges complete failure of oversight and accountability. Promises protection for employees speaking up. This is what real leadership looks like." Denver airport discrimination. Brad Mitchell, who had been silent during the testimonies, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. You're all piling on because of one misunderstanding. I've kept this airport safe for 8 years. His defensive outburst was captured by multiple cameras and immediately shared across social platforms. The contrast between his angry justifications and the calm testimonies of his colleagues was stark and damaging. "Safe for whom?" asked Rosa Martinez, her confidence growing with each moment. "Safe for people who look like you, because it hasn't been safe for people who look like me or him," she said, gesturing towards David Thompson. Luis Hernandez, the airport police officer, made a decision that would define his integrity. "I need to add something," he said. "I've been pressured by security supervisors, including Sarah Wilson, to support aggressive actions against passengers who didn't pose any legitimate security threat." I should have spoken up before now. His admission was particularly powerful because it implicated not just Brad, but the broader security culture that had enabled his behavior. Sarah Wilson's face went pale as she realized that her own actions were being documented and criticized by her own officers. The viral nature of the incident meant that her superiors in airport police would be reviewing her decisions under national scrutiny. Jake Patterson's live stream had become a masterclass in how documentation and courage could expose institutional problems that had been hidden by individual silence. His 42,000 viewers were witnessing not just an incident of discrimination, but the real-time collapse of the systems that had protected discriminatory behavior. The testimonies had created something unprecedented, a comprehensive documented record of pattern discrimination, captured in front of a national audience with multiple credible witnesses willing to speak on record about what they had observed. Margaret Foster understood that traditional damage control was impossible. The only path forward was complete transparency, immediate accountability, and comprehensive reform. Anything less would be scrutinized and condemned by the thousands of people who were now invested in seeing justice done. David Thompson remained calm throughout the testimonies, but those who watched him carefully could see that he was absorbing every word, every detail, every admission. In 1 minute, his phone would ring and everything would change. But the foundation for that change had already been built by the courage of airport employees who chose truth over silence. The pattern was exposed. The accountability was documented. The consequences were inevitable. David Thompson's phone buzzed in his pocket. The first call, right on schedule. He glanced at the caller ID. Apex Logistics, Executive Office. For a moment, he considered answering immediately and ending Brad Mitchell's harassment with a single revelation. But the testimonies from airport employees were still flowing, creating a comprehensive record of institutional failure that needed to be complete before any resolution began. He let the call go to voicemail. Jake Patterson's 45000 viewers noticed David checking his phone, and the comment section exploded with speculation. Who's calling him? Maybe it's his lawyer. This is about to get even more interesting. Answer the phone, Brad Mitchell. Desperate to regain control of a situation that had completely escaped his authority, pointed at David's phone. You see that he's probably coordinating with whoever put him up to this. This whole thing is orchestrated. The accusation revealed the depth of Brad's delusion. Even with multiple employee testimonies documenting his pattern of discrimination, even with thousands of people watching his behavior in real time, he was still trying to blame his victim for the consequences of his own actions. Margaret Foster recognized Brad's comment as potentially creating additional legal liability. Accusing someone of orchestrating their own harassment without evidence could constitute defamation, especially with such extensive documentation of the accusation being broadcast live. Brad, she said firmly, I need you to stop talking immediately. Anything you say from this point forward will be used in our administrative review and any potential legal proceedings. The warning was both professional advice and a public signal that the airport was distancing itself from Brad's statements. Margaret understood that institutional liability could be limited if she demonstrated immediate recognition that Brad's behavior was unauthorized and unacceptable. David's phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID read Denver International Airport, Director's Office. Margaret Foster was calling him while standing 20 feet away, which meant someone in the airport administration had identified him and understood exactly how serious this situation had become. Again, David let the call go to voicemail. Monica Chen caught the interaction and immediately tweeted airport directors just called the passenger she's standing near. Someone in management knows exactly who this man is. The tension is incredible. Denver Airport Discrimination Elena Vasquez noticed the phone calls too, and her TSA training kicked in. Passenger identification was part of her job, and she had access to databases that could reveal more information about travelers than most people realized. Tyler, she whispered to Brooks, I think we need to be prepared for this situation to get much more complicated. Tyler nodded grimly. I've been documenting everything on my employee tablet. Whatever happens next, there's going to be an official record. Sarah Wilson was experiencing the collapse of her authority in real time. Her aggressive support of Brad's actions was being broadcast to a national audience. Her own officer was questioning her judgment, and the airport director was clearly preparing to throw both of them under the bus to protect institutional interests. She pulled out her own phone and called Airport Police Dispatch. This is Supervisor Wilson. I need additional units at baggage claim immediately. This situation is becoming unmanageable. But Luis Hernandez, standing right next to her, immediately countermanded the request. Dispatch, this is Officer Hernandez. Belay that request. We don't need additional units. This situation requires de-escalation, not more force. The public disagreement between security supervisors was captured by multiple recording devices and immediately shared across social platforms. Law enforcement disagreeing publicly about the appropriate response to a discrimination incident created additional evidence of institutional confusion and poor leadership. Jake Patterson's livestream viewers were riveted by the developing drama. The police are arguing with each other. Now, this is insane. Someone needs to answer that phone. I can't look away. Carmen Rodriguez made a final decision about her career survival. She approached Margaret Foster directly, her voice loud enough for recording devices to capture. Ma'am, I need to formally request that I be removed from this situation. I cannot and will not continue to support actions that I believe are discriminatory and potentially illegal. Her public rejection of Brad's authority was devastating because it came from his own assistant supervisor. If his direct reports were abandoning him on camera, it became impossible for airport management to claim his behavior had institutional support. David's phone buzzed a third time. This call came from a number he recognized, the Colorado governor's office. News of the viral incident had reached the highest levels of state government, and political leaders were beginning to weigh in on what was rapidly becoming a national story about discrimination and accountability. For the third time, David let the call go to voicemail. Brad Mitchell, watching David ignore multiple phone calls while maintaining his calm demeanor, began to sense that something was very wrong with his assumptions about who he was confronting. "Who is calling you?" he demanded. "Who are you really?" The questions hung in the air with the weight of recognition that Brad's confidence was finally beginning to crack. After 45 minutes of harassment, after multiple employee testimonies about his pattern of discrimination, after thousands of people had watched his behavior broadcast live, Brad was finally beginning to wonder if he had made a catastrophic mistake. Margaret Foster recognized the moment of doubt in Brad's voice and seized the opportunity to begin damage control. "Brad, I think it's time for you to step back and let me handle this situation." But Brad's pride prevented him from accepting defeat gracefully. "I've been handling situations like this for 8 years without interference from management. I know how to identify troublemakers and people who don't belong in secure areas." His refusal to back down even when offered an escape route demonstrated the depth of his commitment to his discriminatory worldview. He would rather face consequences than acknowledge that his judgment had been wrong. Rosa Martinez watched Brad's desperate justifications and felt a moment of clarity about her own complicity in enabling his behavior through silence. "Brad," she said, her voice carrying across the terminal, "the only troublemaker here is you. The only person who doesn't belong in this job is you." Her words hit like a gavel. Airport employees publicly rejecting their supervisor's authority, while cameras rolled, created exactly the kind of documentation that employment lawyers and civil rights advocates needed to pursue comprehensive reform. David Thompson checked his watch. In 30 seconds, he would answer the next phone call and reveal information that would transform this incident from a discrimination story into a corporate accountability story. But the foundation had been laid: perfectly extensive documentation, multiple credible witnesses, and a clear pattern of institutional failure. Jake Patterson's live stream had reached 50,000 concurrent viewers. Major news networks were incorporating his footage into their national broadcasts. Social media platforms were struggling to handle the volume of sharing and commenting. The incident had become a cultural moment that transcended its original participants. Tyler Brooks felt the weight of history in the moment. His decision to speak up had created a cascade of revelations that would change not just individual careers, but potentially the entire culture of accountability at Denver International Airport. Elena Vasquez understood that her TSA career would never be the same after publicly challenging security authority on livestream. But watching David Thompson's dignity in the face of obvious harassment, seeing the courage of her colleagues, and recognizing the power of documentation to demand justice made the risk feel worthwhile. Margaret Foster braced herself for whatever revelation was coming. Her administrative instincts told her that David Thompson's calm confidence wasn't the behavior of someone without resources or connections. His willingness to endure extended harassment while maintaining perfect composure suggested he was operating from a position of strength that hadn't yet been revealed. David's phone rang again. This time he looked at the screen, made eye contact with Brad Mitchell, and pressed the answer button. "David Thompson speaking. David Thompson, CEO of Apex Logistics." David said clearly into his phone, his voice carrying across the silent baggage claim area. Every conversation stopped, every recording device focused on his words. 50,000 people on Jake Patterson's live stream held their collective breath. "Yes, I'm at Denver International Airport right now," David continued, keeping his eyes locked on Brad Mitchell's face. "Having some very interesting conversations with your security staff." Brad's face underwent a transformation that would be captured, shared, and analyzed thousands of times in the coming hours. The confident sneer that had defined his demeanor for the past hour melted into confusion, then recognition, then absolute horror, as the full implications of what he had done began to sink in. Jake Patterson's live stream exploded with activity. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read. "CEO, oh my God. Brad is done. This is the best plot twist ever. Someone call an ambulance for Brad's career. Margaret Foster felt her knees go weak. Apex Logistics was Denver International's largest private contractor responsible for cargo operations, supply chain management, and transportation logistics worth over $75 million annually. David Thompson wasn't just any CEO, he was one of the most powerful business leaders connected to the airport's operations. The contract renewal meeting was scheduled for later this morning. David continued into his phone, his tone remaining professional despite the chaos around him. But I decided to conduct some preliminary observations of how our partner facilities operate when they think no one important is watching. Monica Chen's fingers flew across her phone screen. Bombshell passenger reveals he's CEO of Apex Logistics, Denver Airport's largest contractor worth $75 million annually. Supervisor just harassed his own business partner. #Denver Airport discrimination #. Game over Carmen Rodriguez, who had distanced herself from Brad's actions just minutes earlier, felt overwhelming relief that she had made the right choice. Her career had been saved by her moral compass, while Brad's had been destroyed by his lack of one. Sarah Wilson understood immediately that her aggressive support of Brad's harassment had potentially cost the airport one of its most valuable business relationships. Her mind raced through the legal and professional implications of targeting the CEO of a major contractor with discriminatory treatment. "Put me on speaker," came a voice from David's phone. "This is Jonathan Hayes from the Apex Logistics Board of Directors. We've been monitoring the social media coverage of this incident for the past 30 minutes. David pressed the speaker button, and Jonathan Hayes' voice filled the terminal space. "Mr. Thompson, the board has reviewed the live stream footage and employee testimonies. We're prepared to initiate immediate contract review proceedings based on what we've witnessed regarding Denver International's treatment of passengers and management of discriminatory behavior." The words hit the airport like a financial earthquake. Contract review proceedings meant that Apex Logistics was considering terminating their $75 million relationship with Denver International. For an airport that depended on major corporate partnerships, losing Apex could trigger a cascade of financial consequences affecting thousands of jobs. Brad Mitchell, his face now completely drained of color, tried desperately to salvage the situation. "Mr. Thompson, sir, I didn't know. I was just following standard security protocols. There must be some misunderstanding." David's response was measured but devastating. "Mr. Mitchell, for the past hour, you've made very clear what you think of people who look like me. You've demonstrated exactly how you handle authority when you believe no one important is watching. There's no misunderstanding here. There's just accountability." Tyler Brooks felt a surge of vindication as he watched Brad's desperate backtracking. After years of witnessing discriminatory behavior and staying silent, seeing justice delivered with such precision and documentation felt like redemption for every time he had failed to speak up. Elena Vasquez was recording everything on her own phone, now understanding that this moment would become a case study in how social media accountability could force institutional change. Brad's complete reversal from aggressive authority figure to desperate supplicant was happening in front of 55,000 live viewers. Jake Patterson's live stream had become the most watched discrimination incident in social media history. News outlets were broadcasting his footage live. Civil rights organizations were sharing clips across platforms, and legal experts were already analyzing the implications for employment law and corporate accountability. Margaret Foster stepped forward, recognizing that the airport's response in the next few minutes would determine whether they could salvage their relationship with Apex Logistics and their broader reputation for managing diversity issues. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady despite the crisis, "I want to personally apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you've received from our staff. This behavior does not represent Denver International's values or policies, and there will be immediate consequences." David nodded acknowledgement but continued his phone conversation. "Jonathan, I think you should hear directly from the airport employees who witnessed this incident and others like it." He gestured to Tyler Brooks, who stepped forward with his employee tablet. Mr. Hayes, this is Tyler Brooks Airline Operations. I've documented multiple incidents of discriminatory behavior by Supervisor Mitchell over the past several months. Today's incident follows a clear pattern that management has failed to address. Jonathan Hayes's voice carried clearly through the speaker. Mr. Brooks, we appreciate your courage in documenting these issues. Apex Logistics will ensure that you and other employees who spoke up are protected from any retaliation. The promise of corporate protection for whistleblowing employees created an immediate shift in power dynamics. Airport workers who had remained silent out of fear suddenly understood that speaking truth carried less risk than remaining complicit in discriminatory practices. Rosa Martinez found her voice again. Mr. Hayes, I've worked here for 4 years and I've seen Supervisor Mitchell target Hispanic families, black passengers, and anyone who doesn't look wealthy or white. Today was just the first time someone recorded it. Elena Vasquez added, I filed multiple reports about concerning behavior that were ignored by management. The pattern has been clear for months, but no one wanted to address it. Each testimony was being broadcast live to a national audience and documented for potential legal proceedings. The comprehensive nature of the employee statements created an unassailable record of institutional failure and individual accountability. Brad Mitchell made one final desperate attempt to save his career. Mr. Thompson, please, I have a family to support. I was just doing my job. I never meant any disrespect. David's response revealed the full measure of his character. Mr. Mitchell, everyone you've harassed over the past months had families too. Everyone you've humiliated with your assumptions and bias had lives and dignity that mattered. The difference is that they didn't have the power to defend themselves. Today, you discovered what accountability looks like. Jonathan Hayes's voice cut through the terminal. Miss Foster. Apex Logistics will be conducting a comprehensive review of our partnership with Denver International. Our preliminary assessment suggests serious concerns about your facility's commitment to treating all passengers with dignity and respect. Margaret Foster understood that her next words would determine whether the airport faced a public relations crisis or a financial catastrophe. Mr. Hayes, we are committed to immediate and comprehensive reform. Supervisor Mitchell will be terminated effective immediately. Security Supervisor Wilson will be suspended pending investigation. We will implement new training protocols and oversight measures within 30 days. The swift administrative response was exactly what social media accountability demanded. Immediate consequences for discriminatory behavior protection for employees who spoke up and concrete commitments to institutional change. Jake Patterson's live stream reached its peak audience of 60,000 viewers as he captured Brad Mitchell being escorted away from the terminal by airport security. The man who had spent an hour harassing David Thompson with assumed authority was leaving in disgrace, his career destroyed by his own documented words and actions. David Thompson finally stood up, straightening his casual polo shirt and adjusting his messenger bag. For an hour he had endured harassment with dignity. Now he carried the moral authority of someone who had faced injustice without compromising his principles and had used his power to create positive change rather than personal revenge. The revelation was complete. The accountability was achieved. The transformation was beginning. Margaret Foster wasted no time implementing the promises she had made to David Thompson and the 60,000 people watching Jake Patterson's live stream. Within minutes of David's identity revelation, she was on her radio coordinating the most comprehensive disciplinary response in Denver International Airport's history. Security, I need. Brad Mitchell's access credentials revoked immediately, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood that half measures would be scrutinized by a national audience. Sarah Wilson is suspended effective immediately. I want their ID badges, access cards, and any airport property collected within the next 10 minutes. The swift administrative action was captured by multiple recording devices and immediately shared across social platforms. Viewers who had spent an hour watching Brad harass David Thompson were now witnessing the real-time consequences of documented discrimination. Jake Patterson's live stream captured Brad's removal from the terminal. The man who had confidently exercised authority over a space he believed he controlled was escorted out by the same security team he had tried to weaponize against David. The reversal was complete and devastating. "This is incredible," Jake whispered to his 58,000 remaining viewers. "We just watched accountability happen in real time. This is what justice looks like when people have the courage to speak up and the technology to document everything." Tyler Brooks was officially commended by Margaret Foster in front of the recording devices, ensuring that his courage in challenging Brad's behavior was publicly recognized and protected. "Mr. Brooks, your willingness to speak up when you witnessed discrimination represents the kind of leadership this airport needs from all employees." The public recognition served multiple purposes. It protected Tyler from potential retaliation. It encouraged other employees to report discriminatory behavior, and it demonstrated that the airport's new leadership valued truth over institutional protection. Elena Vasquez was immediately promoted to temporary supervisor for the baggage claim area, with Margaret Foster announcing that her integrity and professional judgment qualified her for expanded responsibilities. The promotion was both recognition for her courage and a signal that the airport was serious about reforming its leadership structure. Rosa Martinez was appointed to a newly created position, Employee Advocacy Coordinator, responsible for ensuring that all airport workers felt safe reporting concerns about discriminatory treatment. Her transformation from silenced janitor to empowered advocate became a symbol of how institutional change could create opportunities for previously marginalized voices. Carmen Rodriguez's decision to distance herself from Brad's actions saved her career. Margaret Foster publicly acknowledged that Carmen had demonstrated professional judgment by recognizing inappropriate behavior and refusing to continue supporting it. Her survival became a lesson about the importance of moral courage over institutional loyalty. Luis Hernandez was commended for his professional restraint and proper application of law enforcement protocols. His refusal to escalate the situation unnecessarily and his willingness to challenge his supervisor's poor judgment were held up as examples of how experienced officers should handle complex situations. David Thompson remained in the terminal for another hour, working with Margaret Foster to establish the framework for a comprehensive review of airport policies and procedures. Their collaboration, broadcast partially on continuing social media streams, demonstrated how business partnerships could be strengthened rather than destroyed by accountability and reform. Monica Chen's Twitter thread had reached 100,000 shares, making it one of the most viral discrimination documentations in social media history. Her follower count had jumped to 75,000, and news organizations were offering her paid positions based on her real-time journalism during the incident. The immediate personnel consequences sent shockwaves through Denver International's workforce. Employees who had witnessed discriminatory behavior but remained silent understood that the culture had fundamentally changed. Speaking up was now protected and rewarded, while discrimination was swiftly punished. Margaret Foster held an impromptu press conference in the terminal, addressing both the media crews that had arrived and the social media audience that was still watching. Today, we'd learned that our oversight processes failed to protect passengers from discriminatory treatment. We have taken immediate action to address individual accountability and begun comprehensive reforms to ensure this never happens again. Her response was praised by civil rights organizations and crisis management experts as a model for how institutions should handle viral discrimination incidents. Swift action, complete transparency, and genuine commitment to change had transformed a public relations disaster into an opportunity for meaningful reform. The Colorado governor issued a statement praising the airport's response and announcing that David Thompson would be invited to join a state-level task force on transportation equity. Brad Mitchell's harassment had inadvertently elevated David to a position where he could influence policy across the entire state. Federal aviation authorities announced that Denver International's response to the discrimination incident would be used as a model for other airports facing similar challenges. The comprehensive documentation and swift accountability measures had created a blueprint for how institutions could rebuild trust after discriminatory incidents. Legal experts analyzing the situation confirmed that the airport's immediate response had likely limited their liability, while the extensive documentation of employee testimonies had created a strong foundation for any future civil rights enforcement actions. Brad Mitchell's termination was processed within 2 hours, with his personnel file permanently flagged for discriminatory conduct that would make him unemployable in any position requiring interaction with diverse populations. His career in airport security was finished, and his viral infamy would follow him to any future employment opportunities. Sarah Wilson's suspension became a termination by the end of the day after her personnel file revealed a pattern of supporting discriminatory actions by subordinates. Her aggressive backing of Brad's harassment had demonstrated that she was unfit for supervisory responsibility in a diverse workplace. The speed and comprehensiveness of the consequences sent a clear message to airport employees nationwide: discrimination would be swiftly punished, courage would be rewarded, and institutional change was possible when people chose accountability over protection. Within 48 hours of the incident, Margaret Foster had implemented the most comprehensive diversity and inclusion reforms in Denver International Airport's history. Working directly with David Thompson and drawing on best practices from Apex Logistics' own corporate culture, the airport established new protocols that would serve as a model for transportation facilities nationwide. The first change was the creation of mandatory bias recognition training for all supervisory personnel, delivered not as a one-time seminar, but as an ongoing educational process with quarterly updates and annual certification requirements. Tyler Brooks was selected to lead the program development, ensuring that the training reflected real workplace scenarios rather than theoretical discussions. Elena Vasquez's promotion to permanent supervisor came with expanded authority to investigate and address discriminatory behavior at any level of the organization. Her new position included direct reporting access to Margaret Foster's office, bypassing the middle management layers that had previously buried discrimination reports. Rosa Martinez's employee advocacy coordinator role was given substantial resources and independence. Her office was empowered to investigate complaints, confidentially recommend disciplinary actions, and coordinate with legal authorities when discriminatory behavior potentially violated federal civil rights laws. The airport established a partnership with local civil rights organizations to provide external oversight of their reform efforts. Quarterly audits would be conducted by community advocates with full access to personnel files, complaint records, and employee feedback about workplace culture changes. David Thompson's Apex Logistics provided consulting services for the airport's cultural transformation, sharing the diversity and inclusion practices that had made their company a model for equitable workplace management. The partnership demonstrated how business relationships could be strengthened through shared commitment to justice and accountability. A new passenger advocacy program was created, allowing travelers to report discriminatory treatment through multiple channels. Anonymous online forms direct phone access to Rosa Martinez's office, and partnerships with civil rights organizations that could investigate complaints independently. All airport supervisors were required to complete implicit bias training conducted by external experts rather than internal trainers. The curriculum specifically addressed the assumptions and stereotypes that had driven Brad Mitchell's harassment of David Thompson, using the documented incident as a case study in how bias operates in professional settings. Employee protection protocols were strengthened to ensure that workers like Tyler Brooks, Elena Vasquez, and Rosa Martinez could report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. The new policies included financial protections, legal support, and clear pathways for career advancement for employees who demonstrated moral courage. Margaret Foster established monthly community forums where passengers and airport employees could discuss diversity challenges and suggest improvements to airport operations. The forums were live-streamed on the airport's social media channels, ensuring transparency and ongoing public accountability. The airport's hiring practices were overhauled to prioritize candidates with demonstrated commitment to inclusive leadership and cultural competency. All future supervisory positions would require candidates to complete scenario-based assessments, evaluating their response to potential discrimination situations. Training protocols were updated to include extensive role-playing exercises where employees practiced de-escalation techniques and bias recognition in realistic airport scenarios. The training used video footage from the Brad Mitchell incident with David Thompson's permission to demonstrate how discrimination escalates and how it can be prevented through proper intervention. A partnership with local universities was established to research and document best practices for maintaining inclusive workplace cultures in high-stress, security-sensitive environments. The research would be shared with other airports and transportation facilities facing similar challenges. Recognition programs were created to celebrate employees who demonstrated inclusive behavior, reported discriminatory conduct, or contributed to positive cultural change. Tyler Brooks, Elena Vasquez, and Rosa Martinez became the first recipients of the new Courage and Leadership Awards. The airport's social media presence was transformed to include regular updates about diversity initiatives, employee spotlights celebrating inclusive leadership, and educational content about recognizing and addressing bias in professional settings. Margaret Foster established direct partnerships with minority business associations to ensure that the airport's vendor relationships reflected the community's diversity. David Thompson's experience had highlighted how discrimination could damage valuable business partnerships that took years to develop. All airport employees received new contact information for reporting discriminatory behavior, including direct access to external civil rights organizations and legal resources. The multiple reporting channels ensured that concerns couldn't be buried by supervisors who might have personal interests in protecting discriminatory colleagues. The changes were documented extensively and shared with other airports as a comprehensive model for institutional reform following discrimination incidents. Denver International's response became a case study in how transparency, accountability, and genuine commitment to change could transform public relations disasters into opportunities for meaningful progress. Federal aviation authorities incorporated elements of Denver's reform program into their recommended guidelines for airports nationwide, ensuring that David Thompson's experience would influence transportation equity policies far beyond Colorado. The implementation timeline was aggressive but achievable: 30 days for initial training rollouts, 60 days for full policy implementation, and 90 days for the first comprehensive assessment of cultural change. The ambitious schedule demonstrated that the airport was treating reform as an urgent priority rather than a long-term aspiration. 6 months later, Denver International Airport received a national award for excellence in workplace equity and inclusion, recognizing their transformation from a facility that had enabled discrimination to a model for how institutions could rebuild trust through genuine accountability and comprehensive change. Jake Patterson's Instagram livestream had changed his life in ways he never anticipated. The business consultant who had spontaneously decided to document discrimination at Denver International Airport found himself at the center of a national conversation about social media's power to demand accountability and justice. Within a week of the incident, Jake had received interview requests from major news networks, speaking engagements from civil rights organizations, and consulting opportunities from companies wanting to understand how viral accountability could transform workplace cultures. His follower count had grown from 800 to 150,000, and his accidental journalism had opened doors to a new career in social justice advocacy. "I never intended to become an activist," Jake reflected in an interview with CNN. "I just saw something wrong happening and felt like someone needed to document it. But I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is press record and refuse to look away." Monica Chen had parlayed her Twitter documentation of the incident into a position as a staff writer for a major online publication covering discrimination and accountability in the travel industry. Her thread about David Thompson's harassment had been studied in journalism schools as an example of how real-time social media reporting could influence breaking news coverage. Her newfound platform allowed her to investigate and document discrimination incidents at airports across the country, giving voice to passengers who had experienced bias but lacked the resources or visibility to demand accountability. Monica had found her professional calling in the space between journalism and advocacy. Tyler Brooks had become a national symbol of workplace courage, speaking at conferences about the importance of challenging discriminatory behavior even when it might cost you professionally. His decision to publicly oppose Brad Mitchell's harassment had transformed his career from airline operations into diversity and inclusion consulting. The scariest moment wasn't confronting my supervisor, Tyler explained in speeches to airport employees nationwide. It was realizing how many times I had stayed silent before that moment. I couldn't live with myself if I let David Thompson stand alone when I knew what was happening was wrong. Elena Vasquez had been promoted twice since the incident, eventually becoming Denver International's Director of Passenger Experience and Equity. Her transformation from a TSA agent afraid to challenge authority to a senior leader responsible for preventing discrimination had inspired similar career paths for women and minorities throughout the transportation industry. Rosa Martinez had discovered a talent for advocacy that surprised everyone, including herself. Her employee advocacy coordinator position had expanded into a consulting role that helped other airports develop support programs for workers who witnessed discriminatory behavior. Her courage in speaking up despite her vulnerable position had made her a sought-after voice in discussions about protecting marginalized employees. David Thompson had used the incident as a catalyst for expanding Apex Logistics' diversity and inclusion consulting services. The company now worked with major corporations to conduct similar invisible inspections that revealed how organizations treated people when they believed no one important was watching. The most valuable lesson David reflected in a Harvard Business Review article about the incident was that character is revealed not in how you treat your superiors, but in how you treat people who you believe can't help or hurt you. Brad Mitchell showed his character completely in 1 hour. The question for every leader is, what does your character look like when you think no one is watching? Margaret Foster's leadership during the crisis had elevated her national reputation as a model for how administrators should handle discrimination incidents. She had been invited to join multiple boards and consulting groups focused on organizational accountability and cultural change in public institutions. The former Brad Mitchell had disappeared from public view, his LinkedIn profile deleted, and his social media presence scrubbed. Employment lawyers confirmed that his viral harassment of David Thompson had made him effectively unemployable in any customer-facing role. His name had become synonymous with workplace discrimination and abuse of authority. Carmen Rodriguez had learned valuable lessons about moral courage that shaped the rest of her career. Her decision to distance herself from Brad's behavior at the crucial moment had saved her professionally, but more importantly, it had taught her that institutional loyalty should never override personal integrity. Luis Hernandez had been promoted within airport police and had become a trainer for de-escalation techniques in potentially discriminatory situations. His professional restraint during the incident and his willingness to challenge his supervisor's poor judgment had made him a model for how law enforcement should handle bias-related confrontations. The incident had also transformed the broader culture at Denver International Airport. Employees who had previously remained silent about discriminatory behavior now felt empowered to speak up, knowing that courage would be rewarded rather than punished. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment dropped by 85% in the year following the incident, not because discrimination had been eliminated, but because the cultural changes had created an environment where bias was quickly identified and addressed before it could escalate to harassment. David Thompson kept a framed copy of Jake Patterson's original Instagram post in his office, along with screenshots of the employee testimonies that had revealed the full scope of Brad Mitchell's discriminatory behavior. The display served as a reminder that justice often required patience, documentation, and the willingness to endure injustice long enough to create lasting change. Revenge would have been easy, David told his wife during a quiet dinner conversation months after the incident. I could have ended Brad's harassment immediately by revealing who I was, but real change required letting him show everyone exactly who he was when he thought he had all the power. Sometimes you have to let people destroy themselves to save everyone else. The personal transformations that emerged from that hour at Denver International Airport had rippled far beyond the original participants, inspiring thousands of people to find their own courage in the face of injustice, and proving that individual actions could indeed create institutional change. 6 months after that transformative morning at Denver International Airport, David Thompson returned for his quarterly inspection. This time he arrived in his usual business attire, met by Margaret Foster, with the full ceremony appropriate for a major contractor and partner in organizational change. As David walked through the same baggage claim area where Brad Mitchell had harassed him, the difference was remarkable. Airport employees moved with professional confidence, treating all passengers with respect regardless of their appearance or perceived status. The cultural transformation was visible in every interaction. Near Carousel 3, where everything had begun, Rosa Martinez was training a new employee about the passenger advocacy procedures. She looked up as David passed, offering a warm smile that carried volumes about dignity, courage, and the power of speaking truth even when it felt dangerous. Tyler Brooks approached with a quarterly report about the airport's inclusion initiatives. His confidence had grown immeasurably since that morning when he first challenged Brad's authority. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "the changes you helped create have transformed this place. Employees feel safe reporting concerns, and passengers are treated with the respect everyone deserves." Elena Vasquez, flourishing in her role as Director of Passenger Experience and Equity, briefed David on the latest training programs and accountability measures. Her journey from fearful TSA agent to empowered leader had become a model for how institutional change could create opportunities for previously marginalized voices. As David prepared to leave the airport after his inspection, he reflected on a simple truth that had guided his entire approach to the incident. Respect isn't earned through titles or wealth. It's owed to every human being simply because they exist. The morning's confrontation had taught him something profound about the nature of justice. Real accountability wasn't about destroying Brad Mitchell's career. It was about creating processes that prevented the next Brad Mitchell from destroying someone else's dignity. The viral nature of the incident had sparked conversations in airports across the country, leading to policy changes, training programs, and cultural shifts that affected millions of travelers. What had started as one man's willingness to endure discrimination for the sake of documentation had become a catalyst for nationwide reform in the transportation industry. But the most important change wasn't in policies or procedures. It was in the understanding that ordinary people had the power to demand extraordinary accountability when they chose courage over silence. Jake Patterson's decision to press record Tyler Brooks's choice to speak up, Elena Vasquez's willingness to challenge authority, and Rosa Martinez's courage to share her truth had created a perfect storm of documentation and testimony that made denial impossible and change inevitable. David thought about his father's words from 30 years earlier. "Sometimes you have to let people show you exactly who they are before you can change who they become." Brad Mitchell had shown the world exactly who he was in that hour of harassment. But more importantly, Tyler Brooks, Elena Vasquez, Rosa Martinez, and even Margaret Foster had shown who they could become when faced with the choice between complicity and courage. The lesson extended far beyond airport security or corporate contracts. In a world where discrimination often operated through subtle biases and quiet exclusions, the Denver International incident had demonstrated the power of comprehensive documentation, the importance of witness courage, and the possibility that viral accountability could create lasting institutional change. As David's plane lifted off from Denver International Airport, he carried with him not just the satisfaction of accountability achieved, but the deeper understanding that lasting change required more than individual consequences. It required cultural transformation that made discrimination not just punishable, but unthinkable. The story didn't end with Brad Mitchell's termination or even with the comprehensive policy reforms. It ended with the recognition that every person who witnessed discrimination had a choice: remain silent and enable the process, or speak up and help transform it. Sometimes the most powerful people do walk among us in ordinary clothes carrying messenger bags instead of briefcases, wearing polo shirts instead of suits. But the real message of David Thompson's experience wasn't about hidden wealth or secret authority. It was about the fundamental dignity that belongs to every human being, regardless of their appearance, their accent, their clothes, or their perceived status. Brad Mitchell had made the mistake of believing that respect was conditional on his recognition of someone's importance. He learned too late that respect is unconditional, owed to every person simply because they are human. The viral documentation of his harassment hadn't just exposed individual bias. It had revealed how discrimination operates in institutions when good people choose silence over intervention, when processes protect authority over accountability, and when the cost of speaking up seems higher than the cost of looking away. David Thompson's patient endurance of that harassment had created space for others to find their courage. His willingness to let Brad Mitchell reveal himself completely had provided the comprehensive evidence needed for meaningful reform rather than superficial apologies. The next time you see someone being dismissed, disrespected, or diminished because of how they look, remember, you might be watching someone with the power to transform entire institutions, or you might be the only witness to injustice that depends on your silence to continue. Either way, your choice to speak up or stay quiet will determine what happens next. Real change doesn't happen because of dramatic confrontations or viral videos. It happens through the patient work of people who refuse to accept that dignity should depend on perceived status or authority. Every person deserves respect. Whether they're signing million-dollar contracts or sorting luggage, wearing suits or uniforms, speaking with authority, or simply asking for help, every human being deserves to be treated with dignity. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is press record. Sometimes it's speaking up when everyone else stays silent. Sometimes it's choosing truth over convenience, courage over comfort, justice over institutional loyalty. The Denver International Airport incident proved that individual actions can create institutional change, that documented truth can overcome entrenched power, and that ordinary people have extraordinary capacity to demand justice when they choose to act rather than observe. Make it matter, make it count, make it change everything. If this story opened your eyes to the power of standing up for what's right, I want you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button to show that dignity and respect matter to you. Second, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories about justice, courage, and people who refuse to stay silent when they witness discrimination. Third, share this video with your family, friends, and coworkers because everyone needs to understand that we all have the power to create change when we choose courage over comfort. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when you witnessed discrimination or had to make the choice between speaking up or staying silent. Your story matters, and it might inspire someone else to find their voice when it counts most. Remember, real change happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things. When we document injustice, when we speak truth to power, and when we refuse to let discrimination hide in the shadows. Every share, every comment helps spread the message that respect isn't earned through titles or wealth. It's owed to every human being simply because they exist. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being the kind of person who believes that everyone deserves dignity. Together, we can make sure that stories like David Thompson's lead to lasting change rather than temporary outrage. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that stands up for justice one story at a time.